Alright, so we've talked about stress and how it has such a huge impact on our health. So, what can we do to help us become more resilient to stress? Because stress is going to happen in our lives, but it doesn't necessarily have to impact us so harshly. So, we're going to talk about ways that we can cope with stress. And I don't talk about humor in the rest of this lecture, but I would like to point it out here because I think this meme is really funny, but it does bring up a good point that humor is a coping mechanism for stressful events. For ages, humans have used humor to relieve the tension of really stressful situations. And nowadays, the most popular method for humorous content is memes. Alright, so let's start with the ups and downs of stress. This is going to show you that there is a certain level of stress that's good, but then there's certain levels of stress that aren't so good. So where can we get this sweet spot? So this figure is called the Yerkes-Dodson law. It shows the optimum level of arousal for good performance. And as you can see here, the more and more arousal you have and you're trying to complete a simple task, the better and better your performance is. So a simple task could be putting paper into envelopes. It's very simple. You don't really have to think much about it. So the more and more aroused you are, the faster you can do that. But for more difficult tasks, you do start to go up in performance on a certain level of arousal, but then this interesting thing happens. You hit a high point, and then as arousal increases, your performance decreases. As arousal gets too high, it goes back down. So you can think of this as, say you're giving a presentation in class. Maybe you really aren't prepared, but you really don't care about the presentation. You just want to get it over with, and you are just like, well, whatever. So you have a really low level of arousal. Just don't care. And if you're underprepared, this is probably going to give you a weak performance for this because you have quite a low arousal. However, on the other side, if you care a lot, you really, really, really care, and it's making you really, 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 really nervous. So like you're sweating, your heart is racing, maybe your hands are trembling. That is also going to make your performance weak. That could make you forget what you're going to say. It could even make you sick. So there is this sweet spot in the middle, this middle point of arousal that gives you the best performance. So you want to be somewhat nervous or somewhat excited, but you don't want to be too nervous or too excited. So how do we get to this middle point? So, what strategies do you use to cope with stressors? What's a time in your life that's been really stressful? What did you do to deal with that stress? So, a popular way to deal with stress is called avoidance, and this is just ignoring the situation. This is not a good coping strategy. It makes the situation worse. If you ignore a situation, that does not mean it goes away, and that does not mean your stress goes away. Your stress can actually get worse, and the situation can actually get worse, and eventually your emotions will boil over, and you may end up expressing those emotions in a destructive way, such as maybe doing too many drugs or ruining relationships. or something like that. But then there's problem-focused coping, and this is a better strategy. This involves actively addressing the stressor to solve the issue. So this is action-based. You're thinking, okay, what can I do in this situation to make this less stressful? How can I fix this? And this is a pretty good one. There's another good one that's called emotion-focused coping, and this is when you're trying to prevent the emotions that come with stress, or you're trying to understand them and have them under control. So say you're taking a test, and you're about to take a test, and you're really nervous about it. You're really nervous about how you're going to do. So, what are you going to do with the stress of that test? Are you going to avoid the situation and not study because if I ignore it, it'll go away? Are you going to study for the situation? Because if I study, that'll get me prepared for the test, and then it'll reduce that stress of taking the test because I will be prepared for it. Or are you going to try and help your emotions of that nervousness? Maybe before the test, right when you're in the classroom, you're going to practice breathing. Or maybe the night before, you'll get a good night's sleep. Or get a massage. Or really practice not having so much anxiety about taking that test. So which is best? That is a great question. Problem-focused and emotion-focused are both good options. One is better than the other in certain situations, and we're going to talk about that right now. So problem-focused has a great impact on mental health in the long term. It is really good for long-term strategies, and it is able to change factors that are causing stress. So this coping mechanism allows you to remove those stressors from your environment. So an example of this is if you have like a lot of paperwork or homework, what do? So you're overwhelmed. That's a stressor, that homework, that huge amount of homework. So what you can do as an action-based, problem-focused coping style is devise a plan to systematically get it done. So this always, making a plan, making lists can always help with stress. Now, plans never really go exactly how we expect, so be forgiving when it doesn't. But this will help if you have a general timeline of, okay, I need to get this one done by then, and then I'll do this one, and then I'll do this assignment, and so on and so on. If you have a plan set in place, it'll remove the stress of like, oh my gosh, I have so much to do, because you have a certain plan of action laid out, and you know what you're supposed to do at any given point. The drawback of this problem-focused coping, though, is it doesn't work as well for stressors that we can't control. There are plenty of stressors in our lives that we have no control over. So problem-focused coping is only for those things that we can do some sort of action to help alleviate it. The uncontrollable stressors, it doesn't work so well for. An example of this would be a death of a family member. You wouldn't be able to just remove that stress from your environment. That would be closer to avoidance if you just ran away from that situation. Because the death of that family member is still in your mind. It's still a stressor for you. You just are avoiding it. So that leads us to emotion-focused coping. This is better for those stressors that you can't control. So what we found is that suppressing negative thoughts does not work. It's it's really helpful to let out our negative thoughts and feelings through expression. We can't just wait for them to go away. We have to let them out somehow, and we should let them out constructively, not destructively. This is a huge point to make. So, constructively expressing them is the way to go, because this means that you are doing it in such a way that you're actually making something or developing. So you could be painting a picture or writing a song, or maybe you're talking to a friend, building that relationship. But destructive expression can be catastrophic. So destructive expression could be um, beating someone up, or destroying relationships, uh, destroying your house. It would be so bad, because the thing is, if you're letting your negative thoughts and feelings out through that type of destructive expression, that's just going to cause more negative thoughts because of the destruction you've left for yourself, because you've just left more negativity in your life. So you want to do it constructively, to let the negative thoughts out and not let any more in. So talking or writing about our emotions are two really, really good ways to do this. Talking and writing are both constructive ways. And another thing that we should develop to cope with stress is emotional regulation. So what emotional regulation is the ability to successfully control our emotions and our reactions to those emotions. So we can control our emotions by that misattribution of arousal, using that to our advantage. So maybe I used to be really, really scared of public speaking. I was super nervous every time I went. And now I still get aroused physically whenever I'm about to public speak. But I've decided that it's not nervousness anymore. It's excitement. I'm excited to speak publicly. That would be the ability to control our emotions. And emotional regulation also involves reacting to those emotions, controlling our reactions. So you might get really angry at some point and you want to lash out, but you know that's not constructive, it's destructive. So you stop yourself. And then later, after the situation, you can calm down and take out your anger constructively. This emotional regulation is incredibly helpful, but it requires an understanding and awareness of our emotions. We have to understand how we're feeling before we can control it, or control our reactions to it. And a lot of people have a really hard time being aware of how they're feeling. A lot of times because they don't let out their feelings. So what's good is that emotional regulation can happen even really young. These are children as young as 4 and 5 that actually are practicing emotional regulation to an extent. They are using impulse control here. They are experiencing this emotion of wanting to eat this food and kind of distress at not being able to. And they're regulating it. They're stopping themselves. And this is called the marshmallow test. So I will show you this.
gratification. We tried it out with the 4 children we've been following since September 2010, Alfie, Millie, Makai, and Pratmesh. Here's how it works. We had each child on their own sit at the table at a desk with a plate and 1 marshmallow. They could either choose to eat the one marshmallow right then and there, or they could wait until I came back into the room and have 2 marshmallows. I left them alone in the room for 15 minutes. Take a look. The marshmallow test has been used for decades by psychologists. It's been used with children to predict later academic success, including literacy, SAT scores, and other academic outcomes. There's no definitive answers from the marshmallow test. It's not a matter of passing or failing. What we're looking for is whether children can really resist this piece of white candy sitting in front of them, that sweet, that, the smell of it, the allure of the marshmallow. In Pratmesh's case, we really saw this added curiosity because he had never actually tasted a marshmallow before. All of the children managed to show some level of self-control and resist the temptation to eat the whole marshmallow. As you can see from the footage, you can catch a glimpse into children's ability to control their impulses. This ability, which is developed around the time of kindergarten, can be linked to other outcomes later in life. In the end, the marshmallows were in kind of different states. Some had been squished, ripped apart, nibbled around. There was this temptation and there was this impulse to kind of try it out.
All right. We're all capable of emotional regulation. Yay! And social support. Social support is so important to reduce stress. So, the buffering hypothesis is a really important hypothesis for this. And it says that when others provide emotional support, the recipient is better able to cope with stressful events. So, when you share your stress with someone and they lend you a shoulder to cry on and an ear to listen to your problems with, and maybe they even offer you advice, but they don't even have to offer advice. They just need to be there for you and be supporting. That will help you cope with the stress in your life. And research has shown that people with social support networks are overall less depressed, recover faster from negative events, and are less likely to commit suicide. So build those social support networks. So how do we try to find peace in such a stressful time like this? Is it even possible to try and find peace within stress? Well, meditation actually is a really good tool for this, at least to find temporary peace. And then it can also transfer into everyday life and really improve your ability to cope with stress. And if meditation isn't your jam, that's okay, because there's 2 main components of meditation that make it so effective, and you can do both of these separately without doing meditation. And I'm going to introduce these to you right now. The first one is called mindfulness. So mindfulness is when you pay attention to where you are and what you're doing in the here and now. You are completely present in what you're doing. You are focused on the present and not the past or the future. So you avoid thinking about the past, which people who tend to ruminate or think way too much about the past, that often leads to depression. And if you think too much about the future, that can often lead to anxiety because you're wondering, what could happen? So mindfulness says the best way to be content is to be in the present moment, to be grateful for what you're doing right now. And then the second component of meditation is practicing breathing. Sounds weird, but it works. It helps you find peace. And specifically, you need to breathe deep and slow and pay attention to your breath. This reduces anxiety, especially if you're paying attention to the breath, and it reduces the risk of panic attacks. So I actually occasionally get panic attacks, and when I can feel one coming on, I practice breathing, because panic attacks are almost always accompanied by hyperventilation, breathing really, really fast and shallow breaths. But if you practice breathing really deep and slow, not only will this calm you down, but it can also prevent that panic attack. And also, this isn't necessarily a component of meditation, but it is related. Just be aware of the snowball effect in your mind. So, what the snowball effect is when you're thinking about a certain situation, and then you think, oh, but what if this happens? And then what if this happens? And then this, and then this, and then this, and then this, oh my God. And you just like keep adding things on and on and on to this thought until it gets crazy. That is the snowball effect. And those are really anxiety-ridden thoughts and often irrational thoughts. And it's actually been shown in research that meditation can actually help you identify when you are thinking these thoughts and help you be able to shut them down. So when you are overwhelmed, if meditation isn't your thing, and you are overwhelmed, you maybe have this snowball effect, or you just think there's so much to do, instead of meditation, you can make a list. You could write down the things you need to do, and write down like them in very small increments. So each item on the list is really, really doable. So if you have to write an entire paper, one of those items should be write the introduction. And then the other one should be write the conclusion, and so on. So not the whole paper, because that's overwhelming, right? It should be broken up. And then once you make that list, focus on one thing at a time. It'll make it a lot less scary, and you will be able to, it'll seem like you're getting way more done, because every little check is gratifying.